Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. Today's headlines. The UK government's immigration plans could reduce the number of workers in Scotland by up to 5% over the next 2 decades, according to the Expert Advisory Group on Migration and Population, who were asked to give the independent expert advice to the Scottish Government. The advisory group highlighted the disproportionate impact of the UK government's proposed salary threshold, under which people earning less than £30,000 a year would not be allowed into the UK. They estimate 63% of workers in Scotland currently earn below that level, which would exclude a great number of women and men, as well as a number of younger people just starting their careers. Speaking on a visit to mathematics research company Think Tank Maths, Migration Minister Ben Macpherson said, "The Scottish Government has been consistently clear that freedom of movement has enriched Scotland and should be allowed to continue. The UK Government's focus on reducing immigration will damage Scotland and does not reflect the needs of our economy or our public services or our communities." Professor Christina Boswell, chair of the Expert Advisory Group, said, "If the UK Government proposals are enacted, we're likely to see a substantial fall in the net migration to Scotland over the coming decades." Chief Executive of Think Tank Maths, Angela Mathis, expressed her concerns about the UK Government's new immigration rules. She said, "The reality is that we have lost key research team members since the EU referendum." She also pointed out that since then, job applications from European Economic Area candidates have dropped from 10 per week to 0. "We know the UK Government has not done detailed research on the specific impacts that their immigration proposals would have on Scotland. I'm therefore grateful to the Expert Advisory Group for their analysis and for highlighting the value of non-UK citizens to Scotland and the vital roles that they play," Migration Minister Ben Macpherson concluded. In a statement to the Scottish Parliament today, Higher Education Minister Richard Lochhead said, "Brexit is already the single biggest risk to Scottish universities, and with 9% of our university students coming from the EU, this damaging policy further threatens our ability to attract and retain EU staff and students." The UK Government's immigration policy ignores the fact that the majority of undergraduate courses in Scotland in the last 4 years, and with the UK's leading universities now labelling it bizarre and a kick in the teeth to Scottish universities, it must be dropped immediately. I will raise this with the UK Government at a meeting of education ministers tomorrow. More generally, this is just a further example of how Scotland's distinct and specific needs have been totally ignored by the UK Government throughout the entire Brexit process. SNP MSP Sandra White hit out at the UK Government's post-Brexit plans for completely failing to consider EU students at Scottish universities. The UK Government has imposed a strict 36-month visa for EU nationals coming to the UK after Brexit in the event of a no deal, despite the fact that undergraduate courses in Scotland last at least 4 years, while courses in medicine and engineering last much longer. Commenting on the proposal, SNP MSP Sandra White said, "This is sheer incompetence from the Tory government, who once again have failed to even give Scotland a second thought. Students and staff across the country are rightly outraged by this reckless disregard for Scotland's world-leading universities. Such an ill-considered policy would be detrimental to our higher education system, driving Europe's top students away from Scotland. The Tories need to wake up and go back to the drawing board." And now, a historical moment, as responsibility for devolved benefits is to be transferred in April 2020. The SNP has hailed an historic moment for social security in Scotland, as the Scottish Government laid out its timetable for the delivery of all devolved benefits. From the 1st of April next year, the Scottish Government will take full responsibility for remaining devolved benefits and Social Security Scotland. By the end of 2020, the Scottish Government will be delivering new claims for all disability and carers assistance and supporting families with their winter fuel bills. Social Security Scotland has paid out over £33 million more than 77,000 carers and Best Start grant, which has put £2.7 million more into the pockets of more than 8,000 families in the first 2 months since it began in September 2018. Commenting, SNP MSP Bob Doris said, "The SNP and government has grasped this opportunity with both hands, successfully delivering the Carers Allowance Supplement and the Best Start grant payments ahead of schedule, and with further benefits to be rolled out this year. While the majority of social security powers remain reserved to Westminster, we are determined to use our powers to make the system fairer where we can, get the discussions right first time and build a system that the people of Scotland can rely on and be proud of, in stark contrast to the government's approach to welfare, which has been described by the United Nations as punitive, mean-spirited and callous." And now, the Trump-Kim summit in Hanoi. This broke up earlier today after President Trump and Kim Jong-un failed to make progress towards a deal acceptable to both parties. The North Korean leader had refused to give up all its nuclear weapon and missile programs without the US removing the nuclear umbrella to South Korea and Japan. With no progress on the nuclear front, the US president said that he had walked away from the talks because of unacceptable demands from Kim Jong-un. To lift, US-led sanctions. The collapse of the summit has led to questions about how prepared Trump and his administration were for the talks and the criticism of his cavalier style of diplomacy. President Trump insisted that good progress had been made in the 2 days of talks, but that he was not willing to rush into a bad deal. There are no plans for a future meeting between the US and North Korean leaders. However, the White House has said that officials from both sides will continue to meet. In breaking news today, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is to be indicted. The country's Attorney General said on Thursday that he intends to indict Mr. Netanyahu in one case of bribery and 2 cases of fraud and breach of trust. In a statement, the Attorney General, Avichai Mandelblit, said that he intended to charge the Israeli leader pending a hearing where Netanyahu would be given a chance to defend himself before charges are filed. The long-awaited announcement marks the first time a sitting Israeli Prime Minister has been put on official notice of a planned prosecution, and it deepens the uncertainty over his prospects in a tight election race. The required hearing will likely be held after April the 9th elections. And now the Labour Party. The Labour Party has decided to back a second referendum. British Labour Party has announced that it would back a second referendum on the European Union membership. However, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has said that the option of the so-called People's Vote would only be used if his party's alternative plans failed. Mr Corbyn went on to say, "After tonight's vote, we will continue to push for a close economic relationship based on our credible alternative plan or a general election." The Labour leader added, "We'll also back a public vote in order to prevent a damaging Tory Brexit or a no-deal Brexit." And now news of the UK car industry. UK car production slumped to an 18% by 18% in January. The production of new cars in the United Kingdom has slumped again in January by an estimated 18%, according to the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. This marks the 8th consecutive month of dwindling manufacturing output. The reasons for the downturn are numerous, including failing demand in a stalled global economy, trade tensions, and the early introduction of strict emissions limits in the European Union. However, the main danger to the British car industry remains the threat of a no-deal Brexit. According to the automotive industry body, the Brexit threat is monopolising time and resources and undermining its competitiveness. Britain's once booming car industry is now in a spiral of declining sales, shrinking investment, and plummeting production. Honda was probably the most dramatic victim of this vicious cycle, announcing the closure of its Swindon factory by 2021 with the loss of 3,500 jobs. And now news of the Scottish National Investment Bank. The Scottish National Investment Bank Bill is published today. Legislation to support the establishment and the capitalisation of the Scottish National Investment Bank has been published by the Scottish Parliament. The bill grants the necessary powers to set up the bank, which will provide financing for business through their whole life cycle. The bank will be a public limited company, and ministers will be given the power to guide its strategic direction by setting missions that will address social economic changes. And now news of a local rail development fund. The Transport Secretary, Michael Matheson, has announced that the Scottish Local Rail Development Fund has reopened for further applications. Mr Matheson said this £2 million fund will help communities bring forward proposals to tackle specific rail connectivity issues. He went on to say 10 communities are already benefiting from £700,000 worth of grants, and I'm keen to encourage more bids for the remaining £1.3 million worth of funds this time round. Organisations that were previously successful can submit updated or new proposals. And now to news of Airbus. Airbus have announced that the redesign of the CE-295 military transport aircraft to remove components manufactured in Germany, following the German government's decision to reject export licenses for arms sales to Saudi Arabia. Germany introduced the ban following the murder of journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi embassy in Turkey last year. The German ban has also held up the UK government's £10 billion deal to sell 48 new Typhoon fighter jets to the Saudi military. Okay, and now, finally this evening, a story close to our hearts. Scottish Water has announced today that it has discovered an interesting series of Victorian photographs showing the history of parts of Scotland's best-loved loch, Loch Katrine. Loch Katrine, as you may or may not know, is the source of drinking water for most of Glasgow and a lot of central Scotland. And the Katrine Aqueduct, which takes that water to be supplied to 1.3 million people, has recently been modernised. And in this modernisation, it was discovered there were photographs that showed a lot of the history of the previous Loch Katrine viaduct crew. So thank you everybody very much this evening for joining me on Scotland at 7. I hope you'll tune in next Thursday when I'll present the show again. Thank you very much. Okay, and we'll leave you with some film of Loch Katrine. Thank you and good night.